The old chestnut integration, audio over a network, how is that straightforward these days, or are you having huge problems with it still as a consultant?
From a technical point of view, it's easy to do these days. There's no standard protocol. There's a few to choose from, but there's a selection of products you can use, and that bit's easy. The difficult bit is engaging with the IT people to understand the network requirements that you need if you're going to use their network, and the fact that you have very specific requests to make sure the audio gets there on time, because it can very easily fall over unless the network adheres to those specific requirements, which obviously you can't have. The audio has to be there.
Who's leading what here? You have a lot of specific requirements. Do you say to
the technology has specific requirements, yes.
Do you say to IT, this is what I need, and you have to understand how they can do it in order to make realistic demands, or does IT say, well, you need to learn more about IT in order to understand what we can and can't do? Which way is it?
We're quite often saying, if this is to work through your network, this is what it needs to do, and we have a fairly standard set of requirements that we can send them. Quite often what happens when you get down to it is that you tend to quite often end up putting it on a separate network because it's all too difficult. And sometimes the cost of the meetings that you have trying to integrate this stuff costs more than the cost of the switches for us to put our own network in. So quite often we have the critical audio going on its own network, but the control can be shared through the building network, because obviously control signals are far, far easier to propagate anywhere. But quite often there's a separate core audio network just because it's easier to do that way. But that's changing, and in principle we should be integrating. With modern networks, there's no really good reason why not these days.
I was going to say it should be quite straightforward, relatively speaking, compared to what it was like 10 years ago, for example. With or without standards, in a sense, it should be, people should be able to accommodate relatively simple requirements for audio. Are they straightforward on the whole?
It is still a challenge, because what you're essentially doing, these network protocols that have been invented for audio, they're really, really, really clever, but essentially they're a hack. You're dividing something that's a continuous waveform that is audio, dividing it up into chunks, sending it down a network, putting it all back together again in the same order, and trying to do that really, really quickly so that you don't have any delay. With video, you have frames of 25 frames a second. Well, that's 40 milliseconds to do that in. We can't possibly have 40 millisecond delays while we're doing things with audio, because that's a huge amount that would be audible and disruptive to the listener. So the fact that these have to be done in sub-millisecond speeds makes it difficult. So there are some particular requirements on the network that aren't impossible, but you have to have a relatively intelligent IT guy to understand why you need that.
What did you learn today as a consultant from today's consultancy session?
I think understanding such a wide variety of views that are all valid, but are often from a completely different standpoint to where I come from, and the fact that a consultant is very different in different market sectors. It's different if you're doing sport to doing financial institutions, and the difficulties are really quite different, and the requirements are different. So even though you're all trying to do the best thing you can for your client and for that project, the constraints you have and the difficulties you have are always changing. And also, I think, understanding more about people who work more for the end client and people who tend to work more in a construction environment where the builder is dictating terms to you as opposed to the client. That was really interesting, hearing those views.